Hello and welcome to week 2, everybody. I hope your first week went well and that you're getting accustomed to all your classes. This week's unit is covering business specific writing and also collaborative work. Most people have a strong opinion about writing. They generally love it or hate it. I tend to waffle back and forth depending on how many hours I've been spending looking at my screen. Like most things in life, if you're not good at it or find it challenging, you probably avoid it. Some people tend to think of the ability to write well as a trait like eye color or height. However, writing is like any other skill. To be good at it, you have to practice it. Your book starts off by describing what writing is. So let's take a look. First of all, writing is a fluid process. When something is fluid, it means that it's dynamic or always changing. Your writing changes as your thoughts change, you gain new information about something, or your view of the material changes. Have you ever read something, maybe a paper you've written, and afterward you felt like it was written by two different people or with several different goals in mind? That highlights the fluid nature of writing. While the fluidity of writing can be a challenge, it's also what makes the process more creative. Writing is also a time-intensive endeavor. Writing takes time, or to be more accurate, good writing takes time. There's no shortcut to effectively communicating through the written language, but you can become more efficient at it. Good writing involves research, planning, and lots of revision. Writing also consists of a series of judgment calls or decisions that you have to make about how to proceed. For instance, you have to decide which words to use, what tone to convey, and which style to adopt. Good writing entails much revision, and revision is basically rethinking and rewriting. Most good writers, like famous artists, never feel that their work is truly finished. They will pore over their writing for hours, days, weeks, or even years sometimes until they feel they have a finished product. At some point, though, especially in school, you just have to have a finished product and turn it in. Now that we understand a little about what writing is, let's discuss what writing is not. Writing is not a mysterious process that only some understand or have special access to. Even muggles can perform magic with the written word. Anyone can learn to write well with good training, patience, and practice. While we can perform magic with words, there is no magical formula to follow to create good writing. There are, however, some tried and true steps that good writers agree on. The last thing to remember about what writing is not is that writing is not completed in the first attempt. Or at least quality writing of any decent length is not completed in one first sitting. Strong writers will pore over their drafts for hours, days, weeks, months, and sometimes years, depending on what they're writing. Although there isn't a magic formula to follow for good writing, your book does discuss 5 stages of the writing process, and a better understanding of these stages can help you become a stronger writer. Like any intellectual endeavor, the first step in the writing process, after you have a general idea of what you want to write about, is to conduct research. Where do you go first when you want to do research? If you're like me and most people, you probably type ideas or questions into that magic box online called Google. We live in a pretty awesome time where the sum of human knowledge is at our fingertips 24 hours a day. Google is a great place to start, but you don't want to support your claims just with Google directly. Use it as a launching pad to find verifiable and vetted research. Particularly in the business context, your readers will want to know that you've done your research. Without research, you won't know where to start or where to end. Everyone has a different writing style. Some people are planners, while others wait to the very last minute and try to write everything in one short period of time. Often I hear from students that they do this strategically because they like the pressure, when often they probably are just procrastinators. And I'll admit to doing that as well. The most effective writers, however, and coincidentally the least stress, take the proper time to plan first. Planning involves the initial generation of ideas, the sorting of those ideas, and the listing or outlining of a plan of attack, as well as developing a writing schedule. The best writers write every day, even if it's just for 30 minutes or 1 hour. Planning also involves creating a clear map of where you want to go. Take a look at this image. What do you see? Which one of these bubbles depicts your writing process most accurately? The writer on the left is clearly generating ideas, but it isn't very well organized, and it'll probably lead to an unorganized or chaotic product. The writer on the right has a much more clear picture in mind of their plan. In writing, we call this plan an outline, and learning how to outline is a skill every writer should master. The most basic way to outline anything is just outlining a clear beginning, middle, and an end, like any good story. And depending on what you're writing, you may also want to use the classic introduction, body, and conclusion, or the 5-paragraph format. The next stage in the writing process is drafting. When you draft, you convert the words and phrases from your outline, brainstormed list, or other notes into clear paragraphs. You begin to construct your document as a whole. Initial drafts are not meant to be finely polished editions of your work. That comes later. Just start writing, and usually start writing with the easiest parts. Drafting will involve moving sections around and perhaps doing more research. Like all steps in the writing process, you should always keep your audience in mind. Now, the next stage in the writing process is the revising stage. Drafting and revising are similar, but two distinct stages. Once you have a solid draft and you feel it's complete to some extent, leave it or have someone else critique it, and then go back and revise. When you revise, you re-see, rethink, and reconsider your entire document. You ask questions about the major issues of content, organization, tone, and format. Revision involves going back and repeating earlier steps in the writing process as well. Editing is the last state of your writing and the quality control phase for your reader. This stage in the writing process might be compared to the detailing of an automobile, or the final preparation a dealer goes through to ready a new car for a prospective buyer. Editing is done only after you are completely satisfied that you have made all of the big decisions about content, organization, and format, and that you have said what you wanted to, where and how you intended for your audience. When you edit, you will check your work to make sure it is readable and correct. You pay attention to sentence length, clarity, word choice, punctuation, spelling, grammar, usage, and tone. Now, you can't learn how to be a better writer through a lecture, but I do want to highlight a few things to concentrate on while you're editing that are also in your book. The first is to avoid needlessly complex or lengthy sentences. Here's an example. Here's our first sentence. In a situation in which a class is over-enrolled, you may request that the instructor force add you. Now, this is a decent sentence, but we can make it we can make this simpler. Here's another example of this sentence. When a class is over-enrolled, you may ask the instructor to force add you. You see how much simpler that is? It saves you a lot of real estate. The next way we can make our writing stronger for the business context is to combine short, choppy sentences. So here we have two sentences about the Blue Angel pilots. Blue Angel pilots must have at least 1,500 hours of flying time. They are some of the best trained pilots. These are two fine sentences. They're very concise. But do we need two sentences here? Instead, we could combine them. Blue Angel pilots, some of the best trained, must have at least 1,500 hours of flying time. This is a more efficient sentence, and in some ways it's much more readable. Another way to make our writing stronger is to edit it so that sentences are as simple as possible, and so they basically tell who does what to whom or what, or the subject verb object pattern, where our direct subject does an action to an object or with an object. Here's an example of that. We have a subject, a verb, and a direct object. And it's important to remember that this works best with transitive verbs or verbs that work directly with an object. Sometimes you can have an intransitive verb usage that doesn't require an object. So an example of that would be the two sentences, John reads a book, which has a direct object, or John is reading. They're both describing a particular action, but one has an object and the other does not. Closely related to this is the strategic use of verbs and how we should always try to use active verbs versus weak passive phrases. Oftentimes we will use weak passive phrases because we think it sounds better or more creative or poetic. So the example here is we have he opens the door, which is a very clear subject verb object sentence, and then the weaker version of that would be the door is opened by him. And in the second case there, what happens is the subject is almost relegated to the object. So in this case, the door becomes the subject and not the person who's opening it. You also want to avoid piling on modifiers. Modifiers are words that enhance or modify other words, usually nouns or adjectives. So in this case, we have too many pesky, overdone, redundant, wordy modifiers. All of those are descriptive of modifiers, the main word there, but are unnecessary. You could maybe just use one there. Another way to improve our writing is to replace wordy phrases or clauses with one or two word synonyms. Here's some great examples. For example, we could take the phrase at this point in time, which sounds sort of fancy and more creative, and simply replace it with now. This can be helpful if you're working with page or word limits. And it's also generally easier for your readers to understand. We can also combine sentences beginning with the same subject or ending with an object that becomes the subject of the next sentence. Here's an example. Homeowners want to buy low-maintenance bushes. These low-maintenance bushes include the ever-popular holly and boxed wood varieties. These bushes are also inexpensive. There's no reason that we need to keep repeating the phrase, these bushes. Here's an edited example. Homeowners want to buy low maintenance and inexpensive bushes such as holly and boxwood. Another way to improve our writing for the business context is to eliminate biased language. And there's lots of different types of bias that can come in language. Oftentimes it's easy to identify racist or insensitive language, which is probably rare in a business context, but still exists, unfortunately. But sexist language is often more covert. I'm going to show you some examples or images, and I want you to think of, or if you want, write down the first word that describes the person or people that you see. Here's the first one. So if your house catches on fire, who comes to put it out? If you witness or want to report a crime, Who do you call? Who takes your order at a restaurant? What is this person's job? How'd you do? My guess is that at least some of you referred to the individuals in the upper left as firemen instead of the preferred firefighters. Similarly, you might have initially thought of the individuals in the upper right as policemen, just like you might have described the bottom two women as either a waitress or stewardess, respectively, instead of police officers, the server, or the flight attendant. We still use sexist language to describe individuals who work in professions that have historically been dominated by one sex. In business writing, however, you never know who will be reading your work, so it's best to adopt a more gender-neutral style. It's pretty easy. You can simply just replace sexist words with more neutral ones. Like in this case, instead of describing this person as a housewife, which is pretty common even today, the more preferred version would be homemaker. You also want to watch out for those sneaky masculine pronouns that we often use unintentionally. For instance, you might see a phrase like this in a syllabus. Student should bring his book to class. Well, clearly, at least for this individual in the picture, this would not be relevant because they are objectively a female. So how do we fix this? Well, we could make it plural. We could say the student should bring their books to class, or we could just eliminate it altogether. Students should bring books to class every day. Make sure when you're writing that you do not single out or describe individuals because of their race, gender, national origin, or any other stereotype. In informal conversation, sometimes it is necessary to describe someone based on a physical characteristic, but you should always do so in a respectful manner. When writing, you also want to be careful to identify members of international communities accurately. So instead of referring to somebody as Asian, you want to be specific as possible. So stating their specific nationality is Chinese, Korean, or Japanese, etc. And in fact, it's probably rarely required that you would actually need to identify somebody's nationality like that. So it's best to avoid it altogether. Similarly, you want to watch out how you describe people in different age groups. While oftentimes people think that the word elderly or old isn't offensive, oftentimes individuals of those age groups will find offense with that. So try to find a more preferred, more neutral description, like an aging adult or something like that. The person in this picture is not their disability. Describing someone as handicapped, for instance, which is still used commonly, is a way to totalize that person to the point where it seems all we know of them is that one characteristic. For instance, it is preferred to describe the individual in the picture here as using a wheelchair instead of being in a wheelchair, which is a more permanent descriptive state. Let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit. Towards the end of the chapter, it starts to discuss collaborative writing or collaborative work in general, which people also have strong opinions about. Let me ask, how many of you like to do group work? It's been my experience that many college students do not. And why do we think that is? There are many reasons, but one of the primary ones is sort of the free writer problem. In a situation where everyone shares a grade, it's common for some individuals to do the majority of the work while others get by with slacking, but still reap the rewards of the group. It can also work in the other way, where somebody works really hard and is a quote-unquote good student, but because of the laziness or lack of effort for our individuals, they bring the grade down. Despite the problematic nature of collaboration sometimes, it is necessary in both school and work, um, and it offers many advantages that we don't always think about. There are quite a few advantages to working in groups that we don't always identify. Here are some. Well, that's all we have for this lecture, and I hope it helped clarify some things in the chapter. If you have any questions or concerns, go ahead and email me, and good luck on your assignments for week 2, which involves a quiz and a series of exercises that will help you improve your writing, as well as a discussion board prompt. Also, I have made available the email assignment, which is due next week. So go ahead and take a look at that, and if you have questions, please let me know.